Christmas may be over, but unfortunately winter is far from it. So I have 5 book recommendations to help you celebrate this winter season. The first book I want to talk about is one that I just recently finished, and that is The Woman in Black. In this story, the main character is tasked with settling the estate for a woman who has just died and heads off to a remote town in England to deal with her affairs. This one is the book that the movie with Daniel Radcliffe was based on. I did watch the movie when it came out, but I hadn't seen it at all since, and so I was really excited and looking forward to reading this. This book comes up on a lot of Reddit pages when I search for like classic haunted house stories. You know, that's my favorite niche, so I felt like it was about time that I actually read this story. This is only one of 3 books that I've ever actually been scared while reading, so I think that that alone is a great recommendation for it. I will say that I do really enjoy Gothic novel stories because I teach them in my English class. This book does technically open on Christmas, so while the rest of the book takes place kind of pre-Christmas, it is still very winter-y. I'm trying to find recommendations that weren't based on Christmas or around the actual holiday, so they were kind of just about the winter season in general or took place in the winter season, and there's a lot of snow and cold specifically in this book outside of the contextualizing story, I guess, of this. It was one that, again, was recommended to me by Reddit. Wanted to give it a go, and I actually ended up really enjoying this. I think that I would recommend this to someone who is looking for a Gothic novel type of story, but wants to go kind of more traditional. This isn't especially unique, I would say. I would say it's pretty traditional in all of its conventions, but that doesn't mean that it's a bad story. In fact, I really enjoyed it. Again, only one of 3 stories that I've ever been scared of reading while I'm actually reading it, which I think is pretty high praise. The next one is What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. This is technically the sequel to this story. The first one is What Moves the Dead, but I think that this one could also be a standalone if you don't want to read the first one. In this book, the main character returns home to his ancestral mansion and finds that things just aren't right here. This is a ghost story, so this book technically takes place in autumn. However, it is especially cold and damp and rainy, and that is winter for some people. So I think that it fits in pretty well into that, in that cold, gross weather, which is definitely what I think of when I think of winter. This takes place in a fictionalized country in Europe. Again, fits firmly into the Gothic novels. A lot of these are Gothic novels because that's one of the main things. The weather is terrible in Gothic novels. But I think this fits pretty well into that very traditional genre while being very creative and unique. This is a super modern take, I would say, on that genre. The culture of this fictionalized society is very modern, and once you read it, either this one or the first one, you kind of can understand what I mean. This is a ghost story. It actually kind of reminds me of Nothing But Black and Teeth, just because it has to deal with folklore and ancient ghosts and demons. Is also another interesting element that you don't necessarily see in Gothic novels. A lot of them are pretty straightforward. A traditional ghost, a vampire, Frankenstein. They are pretty cut and dry when it comes to the creatures involved in them, and I think that this one is very unique. Again, I think it can be standalone. However, I also gave 5 stars to the first one, What Moves the Dead. So if you're looking for 2 recommendations in one, this series by T. Kingfisher could be for you. The next one is The Overnight Guest. This one takes place during a snowstorm where the main character is snowed in and an overnight guest shows up at her house. This is kind of interpositioned with 2 different stories, so the modern tale and then also the story of a girl who was kidnapped years and years ago, and those 2 stories are kind of mixed into one in this story. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars when I read it. I think this one definitely falls more firmly into the thriller genre than the horror genre, but there are definitely some horror elements in there. I think this kind of reminds me a lot of more traditional kind of like Riley Sager books. Lots of twists and turns, very firmly in that psychological thriller genre, as well as having some more like true crime elements in this. So I think this is a great read. Obviously, Snowstorm fits very firmly into those winter vibes. All right, next book is All the White Spaces, and this is about an Antarctic expedition. This book I wanted to love a lot, and I think that I should actually reread it because I think that I just didn't understand enough about Antarctica and like Arctic expedition history to really appreciate what this book was doing and what it was about. This is also a ghost story set in Antarctica, and I really like adventure horror, so again, I thought that I would kind of love this one. I ended up giving it 3 stars, so still really good read. Obviously, Arctic weather, Antarctica, cold, snow, fits perfectly with winter there, and it's also an adventure horror, which is probably not something you would think of when looking for winter stories. I will say you should probably read up on like the history of Arctic expeditions and like the technology and culture available on that before, like just a quick Wikipedia read, because I was really confused sometimes about like the technology they were talking about and the things that they were describing. Whereas if I think that I had a little bit more background knowledge into all of those things, I would have understood this story a whole lot better. The last one is another classic, and it's The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. In this one, a governess takes a job at a remote manor caring for 2 children. It has also been adapted by Mike Flanagan, so I talk frequently about The Haunting of Hill House on this channel. This is the basis for the adaptation for The Haunting of Bly Manor. So if you're interested in reading all of the original stories from the Mike Flanagan series, this is one of them. Additionally, it's super short. So if you're looking for a quick read over, I don't know, winter break, if you're a teacher or a student, or just over a long weekend, this one would be one that would be pretty easy to finish in a day. This is also a Gothic novel, but this one was actually written, I think, in the 1800s, so it was set when it was published. So you are gonna get some more of that formal diction in there when you're reading this, so be aware of that. This one's just very classic. I would say that this is, it's probably not the first, but it's probably the oldest, most famous example of a psychological thriller in the horror genre. I would say if you're a fan of Edgar Allan Poe, this is probably right up your alley. It makes you kind of question a lot of what is real and what is not. We have an unreliable narrator in it, and you're really left questioning to kind of draw your own conclusions about what actually happens in this story. So again, perfect quick read. I think many of us, if you're like me, are probably setting ambitious reading goals, so I think this is one to not only read a good story set in the winter time, but also to start working on some of those ambitious reading goals, to say the least, by starting off with a 100-page novella. So those are all my recommendations, just a super quick 5 recommendations for you. Winter is definitely my least favorite season, and so I'm trying to find ways to enjoy and celebrate this frankly terrible season. So let me know in the comments what you are doing to endure the winter season this year, or how you're trying to romanticize the winter season, because I think this is one season that I just really struggle with romanticizing and enjoying. So if you have any tips or recommendations, let me know, and I will see you in the next video.